Rivalry weekend in the SEC. We got Steve Merrill, as always, from Wager Talk to break down the lines across college football. Check out the segments that Steve and I posted on the Clemson channel with Clemson, South Carolina, also Florida State on the FSU channel. We've got Alabama and Auburn getting together in the Iron Bowl. Auburn coming off the worst loss of the weekend in regards to a point spread, 25-point favorites against New Mexico State, Steve. They lost by 3 touchdowns. They'll try to pull it together against their arch rival Alabama as a 14.5-point dog at home.
Yeah, and I do think the line's been inflated last week's result because my 10,000 game simulation through the database on average has Alabama winning this just 13.5. As you mentioned, it's now 4.5, and point difference, but 14 is obviously a key margin. 3% chance that Alabama wins this game by exactly 14 points. So we have lost some value with the Crimson Tide. But then again, do we trust Auburn? It's hard to back them here. Yes, they qualify as a rival dog with some line value. And is often the case with these games. You have to kind of pull the trigger. But what concerns me with Auburn is they're a run-based offense, and when they get behind, they struggle to catch up. And most likely, as a 2-touchdown dog, they should be behind in this game. They do not throw the ball well this season, and Alabama's, for the most part, down running attacks. Now, they did struggle against LSU a few games back, giving up 200 rushing yards, 206 actually to be exact. And but it's just such a bad loss for outright as a 3.5 touchdown favorite. They scored 10 points. It's really hard to trust Auburn, even though they are a rival dog, a good rival home running dog with some line value.
Alabama, of course, on a collision course with Georgia in the SEC championship game in 2 weeks. Alabama needs to continue to win since they've got a loss, of course, in terms of a playoff bid. Georgia had undefeated, have won a zillion games in a row in the regular season. You got to go back to 2020, the last time Georgia lost straight up in the regular season. They take on Georgia Tech. They're a 24-point favorite. The over-under is 60.
By the way, there are some advanced look-ahead lines, even bettable lines on that SEC matchup. And right now, Georgia's projected to be about a 4-point favorite against Alabama. So that's what we're looking at. Obviously, those lines move a couple points one way or the other when it comes to the real game. But thought that was interesting. Should be an excellent game. And it would obviously be the first huge test for Georgia in quite a while, including the national title game in which they weren't even tested last year as a big favorite against TCU. So, yes, Alabama has that look ahead. Georgia has that look ahead as well, and Georgia's got an even weaker opponent, in my opinion, with Georgia Tech here. And the big news about the Bulldogs, like you said, they continue to win. They're now 11-0 straight up, but they're just 4-6-1 against the spread. They've only covered 4 of those 11 wins this season, and it's been a zigzag basically all year long until last week. It's the first time all year that they covered back-to-back games. They've now covered 3 of their last 4 and 4 of their last 6, so it does look like they're starting to amp things up. We talk a lot about rival dogs this time of the year, and normally that would say, hey, maybe it gives Georgia Tech a chance, but you also can make the argument that this is another game that Georgia will not overlook because it's a rival dog. Currently, they're about a 24-point favorite. I do 10,000 games through the database, simulate them through the database, and on average, I've got Georgia winning by 24.5, so pretty neutral here. I don't see much value one way or the other. Georgia Tech, though, does throw the ball well, surprisingly, this year. They're averaging almost 8 yards per pass attempt. So they do have some backdoor cover potential, especially if Georgia takes their foot off the gas late in the game.
You get Steve's Under the Radar selection exclusively here at the Voice of College Football over on the main channel as a channel member. And Steve is 20-5 against the spread, delivering since week 1 of 2022. All right, Kentucky-Louisville. This Louisville team in an interesting spot could be compared in some ways to TCU's run last year. But Louisville's going to have to complete the run through the ACC championship game to have any hopes of a playoff bid. With Jordan Travis, the Florida State quarterback, going down, you got to think this is just an interesting storyline that Louisville, they've got Kentucky, then they've got Florida State in the title game to try to get to a playoff, taking on this Kentucky team as a 7-point home favorite.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned TCU because last year they were the luckiest team. If you look at different luck metrics, they were the luckiest team in college football. This year, Mark, they're ranked, as of this week, 132nd out of 133 teams in the luck index. And I mentioned them earlier in the Georgia analysis. They were one of the phoniest teams I've ever seen. They did not deserve to be in the Final Four. I talked about that a lot last year on your shows and others, and they were finally exposed. Louisville, last week, 16th. Now they're 7th luckiest team in the country out of 133 this year. So it's a really good comparison, and you keep waiting for them to pick up another loss. TCU's case was pick up that first loss which they did in the conference title game, yet they somehow still got invited to the Final Four. Louisville has that loss, and it was a bad loss at Pittsburgh back in mid-October as a touchdown road favorite. But keep in mind, they're coming off the Notre Dame upset the week before. I thought last week was when they were going to pick up that next loss against Miami of Florida. It was a pick-em game, 38-31. They escape. But I'm back on board. I've used them a few times. In fact, I believe the under-the-radar pick a few weeks ago was Louisville against Virginia Tech, that easy 34-3 win blowout here for the clients and subscribers here on this channel. And I would once again would be back in Louisville in this game for a couple reasons. First of all, my database simulation, 10,000 games simulated, has Louisville winning on average by 13 points. Current line is -7, which is a very key number. And then on top of that, Kentucky is not the type of team that can play from behind. They run the ball well, 5 yards a carry, but they don't throw the ball well. And that's exactly why they've struggled here when stepping up in class. After that impressive 5-0 start, they were exposed against Georgia. They've gone 1-5 straight up and against the spread their last 6 since that Georgia loss started at all. And most of those have been as an underdog. In fact, their only win during the span was against a Mississippi State team that ends up firing their coach right after that. So this is a Kentucky team that struggled stepping up in class, and Louisville matches up well. They've been very average against the pass. Their strength has been the run defense this year, almost a yard per rush better than their opponents have faced. So they match up well, and we get line value with Louisville -7 or less.
Last year, LSU was headed to the SEC championship game, did not have to win the game against Texas A&M, and were upset by the Aggies, a 4-7 football team at the time. Now Texas A&M is coming off a win against Abilene Christian, but also the firing of Jimbo Fisher, taking on an LSU team that lost its key game of the season against Alabama. So no SEC Western Division back-to-back championships for LSU. They're in Death Valley at home as an 11-point favorite against Texas A&M.
Yeah, you mentioned all the uncertainty with Texas A&M, coaching situation, quarterback situation, everything. So this is a really difficult game, I think, to handicap, because do you trust laying double digits with this LSU defense? And by the way, the best bet in all of college sports finally came to an end last week when LSU stayed under the total for the first time all season. They'd been 10-0 to the over. The only reason they stayed under, hitting 70 points, is because that line went from 71 up to 74 during the week. But their team total, 56 points, got over. So LSU team totals continued to cash. And that, of course, was against Georgia State last week. And they blew them out 56-14. A&M's got a lot of distractions. They've still managed to win 3 of their last 4 games straight up. And this is a team overall at 7-4 this season. But a team that I thought would be a lot better this year. You know, coming in, they were a play-on team in September because I thought them along with Oklahoma are the 2 big underachievers last year, and we rode A&M and Oklahoma to a lot of point spread winners early as big favorites in September in those non-conference games. They have struggled a little bit here when stepping up in class. My database simulation has, on average, LSU winning this game by 12.5 points. Current line, as you mentioned, is -11 across the board. Total 66.5. But once again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. LSU overs have still gone 10-1 this season. And I think that's probably the safest way to play this game.
Steve's Under the Radar selection is exclusive to us here at the Voice of College Football as a channel member over on the main page. So head on over to the main channel or on patreon.com/MarkRogersTV. Steve, we appreciate your time as always.